From his discovery on the internet towards 2017, Chris has been quite vocal about his political views. He was once a moderate and then leaned left. Following his shift in gender identity from 2011 onward, he moved further left. His progressing support of the LGBTQ community may have been why he has been so vocal about his politics. In the post-merge era, he mentioned politics infrequently as he's too busy pretending to be the goddess of his imaginary world. And before the video begins, make sure to subscribe. We'll make sure our true and honest CPU blue heart smites you down wherever you are. And with that said, enjoy the video. Before the 2010s, Chris was a self-described moderate. His views were pretty broad and varied. They could best be described as fiscally liberal and socially conservative. He would therefore receive criticism from both sides of the political fence. Liberal trolls criticized Chris for his racism, sexism, homophobia, and black and white views of the world, as well as his poor understanding of science. Conservative trolls criticized Chris for his lack of a job, reliance on the government, unusual behavior, and obscure interests. After the closure of the classic era, Chris's social views started to shift left, while his fiscal views shifted even further. Chris's transgender identity has left him open to political influence from others, particularly as he has begun socializing within the LGBT community and other generally progressive outlets. He even became accepting of gay men, a group he once frantically opposed. Just to put into context how much he legitimately hated the existence of that group, in Financhu issue 10 contains the legendary panels of Chris going to the future to make anti-gay vaccines using his own blood, which in the comics is said to be 100% heterosexual. How humble. And then unload all of these vaccines in the quick-boiled water supply in the modern day to eradicate all homosexuals from existence, and I quote from the infamous panel, "And so on February 24th, 2009, all around the world, every last person will be cured and protected of the orientation of hell, and that day will be declared Christian Love Day." Chris's deteriorating financial situation, continued dependence on government money, and growing health problems for himself and his mother have enhanced his sensitivity to social spending and fiscal policy. In particular, one of PMERT's most prominent policy goals was the repeal of the current Affordable Care Act. While the exact effects of the law on healthcare costs and availability for common people are debatable, it is generally considered at least partially effective. Chris has no doubt heard about Republican repeal efforts from his limited political news exposure and likely holds them against Trump and his allies. Chris voiced criticism of the Republican Party presidential nominee Donald Trump throughout 2016. After Trump's surprise victory, he issued outright death threats against President Trump and Vice President Mike Pence. After they were inaugurated, he viewed himself as part of the anti-Trump resistance, although he did little aside from post memes and additional messages telling them to die. Chris's interest in LGBTQ+ issues likely played a role in his attacks on the then-new administration. However, in 2018, under the influence of the Idea Guys, he talked in a video about opposing Nazis and claimed to be a member of Antifa. He also destroyed a toy pony under the impression that Nazis, a recurring antagonistic presence of the Idea Guys lore, had bugged it. As Chris became more enthralled by the concept of the dimensional merge, he generally tuned out of politics as he became more focused on alternative dimensions and his role in ensuring that cartoons and video games could become real. Chris would eventually voice support to Joe Biden's presidential campaign, but he voted for Lisa Simpson in 2020 because he actually believes that she'll become president of the United States after the dimensional merge takes place. While he continued to hate Trump and Pence, the outcome of the elections didn't matter to him as much personally due to his belief in the delusion. His belief that Lisa is president presumably takes its influence from the Simpsons episode Bar to the Future, which is set years in the future after she succeeds Donald Trump's then fictional administration, which substantially increased the national debt before she took office. However, the events of Bar to the Future are not predictive. Despite numerous viral videos promoting such a misconception, Donald Trump considered running for the job in 1999, 1 year before the episode aired, and the first of the 6 bankruptcies to affect his businesses, which the national debt joke referred, occurred in 1991. Chris's political views resemble a third-grade child's If I Were President social studies assignment, possessing a shallow understanding of major world issues. A rather insightful example of his limited limited understanding of how the world actually works is his video A Public Announcement for Congress, in which Chris explains in detail the actions he would take if elected President of the United States. One doesn't even need to play the video to know that Chris is a bit of a dumbass, as the title, A Public Announcement for Congress, contradicts itself. The video is not directed at Congress in any way, but rather a stump speech directed at the American people. Anyone familiar with Chris's unique manner of speaking knows that he makes a habit of using fancy-sounding words, or to him at least, to make himself sound more intelligent than he actually is. Since Chris has no idea how to actually use these words, the results often make him sound even more like a total moron. In the video, Chris displays to the world that he has no idea how anything works. Chris's first 100 days as president would be as follows. Use federal funds to create massive government housing complexes in every major city for the homeless. Drastically lower the sales tax of the state of Virginia from 5% to 2.5%. Not lower benefits for retirees. Subsidize pharmaceutical costs for retirees. Confiscate all firearms owned by civilians. Legalize gay marriage in every member state of the United Nations. Construct FBI stations to monitor the activities of internet trolls. Ideologically, Chris's views are all over the place, ranging from conservative, like slashing tax rates in half, to extremely liberal views, setting up massive welfare initiatives in the form of soup hotels. And then there's just Chris's regular views, like construct FBI stations to monitor the activities of internet trolls, because the people definitely need more government agents monitoring their online activities. Notably, the 5% tax rate Chris wants to be halved refers to the Virginia sales tax rate and not a federal income tax. Besides the fact that sales tax rates are set up by the states and not by the federal government, and President Chandler would have no power to change this, Chris's misunderstanding of the distinction between income and sales tax points to the fact that, to nobody's surprise, Bob probably filed all of Chris's taxes for him during those 3 incredible months where Chris was actually employed. Since Chris has most likely never seen a W-2 form in his entire life, his approval of cutting taxes was most likely the influence of his late father. This is also most certainly the case with the next 2 points, which both relate to benefits for retired people. He would also take away all firearms from the civilian population, a direct violation of the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution. He then immediately backtracks on this idea, instead settling to just confiscate and ban the sale of ammunition. This ammunition would then be redistributed to the population in the event of an attack from another nation or planet. Not even considering the fact that such a plan would be a logistical nightmare, Chris seems to forget that the United States already has a military to defend itself. So exactly why Chris believes the US population would have to engage in a guerrilla-style warfare against a foreign invader is a mystery. Chris's final proposal is perhaps the most egregious one, suggesting that the resources of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, a federal agency which is among other things dedicated to stopping foreign and domestic terrorist plots, should be used to investigate people who type "you're gay" over the internet. In short, Chris's views on politics at the time were mostly the product of influences of his conservative parents, combined with a well-meaning yet naive understanding of complex socio-political issues like poverty and gun violence. On the 15th of November 2015, Chris wrote a piece on the ISIS attacks in France. He demonstrated a very simplistic notion of ISIS, comparing it to a cartoon villain looking to gather energies and power for themselves. He also tried to understand the motives of the terrorists by using his own life experiences against trolls, saying, "I feel the terrorists, regardless of country, are misguided with paranoia and fear of others." His solution for world peace is simply to stand together, combining our hearts and souls in the efforts to share the light of friendship and love. This ignores all underlying motives for socio-political tensions and is a solution more fitting for a fight among little children. Chris, to many people's shock and horror, actually voted in multiple United States presidential elections. In 2008, Chris voted for Democratic candidate Barack Obama. His main reason for doing so was the fact that he had watched a set of documentaries on both Obama and his Republican opponent, John McCain. Chris, in true and honest form, said he voted against McCain because he couldn't identify with him on a personal level. In December 2008, he stated, "I saw more of myself in Obama when I watched his A&E biography than in McCain McCain's A&E biography, both downloaded from the PlayStation Store. Who would you vote for? A war hero that you couldn't feel that much for, or the guy who you feel like is similar to you in social dilemmas? Chris's reasons for choosing Obama over McCain are understandable, given the number of candidates, successful or otherwise, who has campaigned as a man of the people. However, exactly what qualities of Barack Obama, an obese man-child Soren himself, is currently unknown. Chris elaborated further in 2014 during a date with Catherine. I felt like, with my mental problems and whatnot, I felt like I could similarly relate to him. I felt more relatable to him in that sense than McCain was, as he was the prisoner in that other country. He insisted he did not want to be released early. He wanted to go out with us as the time as everybody else. I mean, that is admirable. Chris would go on to vote for Obama a second time in 2012 for, once again, no real reason beside his claim that he personally identifies with him, saying, "I felt like I wanted to make sure that I had a good reason to decide for the change and having a first black president. Aside from that, because if I had done it on just that alone, that would have been racist." Despite having 4 more years of opportunities to actually understand how a country functions, Chris's reasoning for his choice in the 2016 presidential elections remained laughably shallow. Chris repeatedly made clear his preference for Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton during this election cycle, his main reason being that she is a woman. In February 2016, Chris said, "I feel like America needs a woman's touch finally after all these years," as a reason for why he wanted Hillary Clinton to become president. Chris did make a slight attempt to develop his political views from the Obama era. Instead of just voting for Clinton because she reminds him of himself, he read upon the issues. Unfortunately, this consisted of skimming clickbait articles written by LGBT activists. He also cited an episode of The Simpsons as one of his major sources of being opposed to Clinton's opponent, Donald Trump. When a fan asked him for the reasons to vote for Clinton, he responded, "Hillary will tax the fat cats and fill the middle class and lower and get the country less in debt. She's pro-LGBTQ and immigrants. She's more beneficial for everyone in general, and this country is long overdue for women's touch." Despite claiming to be a feminist, the sexism in Chris's women's touch remarks seemed to elude him. Chris has also given many reasons for opposing Donald Trump, such as he is very spiteful, he's an immature brat who mocks everyone, he is a hot-headed, impulsive, orange-faced, money-grubbing, double-dealing immigrant and race offensive, and most offensive, the LGBTQ, he puts down women very bad, his womanizing and raping actions, he is a male. On 20th of November, he stated Trump is of so many typical offensive male stereotypes, he probably was born with 2 damned Y chromosomes instead of the usual XY pair. He is not valid to be president. He wants the immigrants to build their own keep-out wall, so he would kick them all out. He has ideas of cutting finances from all the more important resources the country needs in communities and feeding the industries from the national debt, and acted against the immigrants in that topic as well. They have to work too, you know. He will only make the country go broke, as Groening predicted, and all the money will only go to his own debtors and the fat cat rich people, and hardly any for us in the middle class and below. And Hillary will tax the fat cats and fill the middle class and lower and get the country less in debt. Interestingly, both Trump and Chris have been accused of sexual harassment. While Trump is legally considered a rapist in regard to his unwanted sexual harassment of E. Jane Carroll, Chris shockingly got scot-free for his incestuous affair after spending over a year in jail and is not considered a sex offender. On the 9th of November 2016, Chris reacted to the news of Donald Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton by throwing a huge temper tantrum. During that time, he asked someone to kill Trump with a sniper rifle, made videos and Facebook posts depicting the president-elected and later vice president-elected being murdered in an effigy using Transformers and Legos, posted to the comment section of LGBTQ Facebook pages and asked its readers to pray for Trump's death. He also signed an online petition asking the Electoral College to disregard the results of the 2016 election and install Clinton in the presidency, which did not happen. Chris has refused to recognize P-Mert as his president, saying Trump is not a president, mayor, or anything in Quickville. Upon reading that P-Mert had said he would sign the First Amendment Defense Act if passed by Congress, a bill opposed by liberals due to potentially enabling discrimination against the LGBT community, Chris first reacted by making a death threat, then writing an open letter directed at the one and only P-Mert. Quick warning, the following content will genuinely give you brain damage. This isn't your regular retarded Chris rants. This is the kind of shit which will get you sent to a psych ward. With that said, you have been warned. Hey hashtag Donald Trump, I have a puzzle for you. In an alternate reality / dimension / universe where A, every person wears the opposite born gender from here, in an example, the Donald Trump, there is a woman, and every president of the United States of America, there has been female. And B, the LGBTQ is the norm and the discrimination happens against the straight people. Would you, the Donald Trump of this reality / dimension / universe, allow the Donald Trump-ette in the opposite reality / dimension / universe sign the anti-straight law that would allow discrimination of yourself ever? If your answer is no, then it should be fit that you do not discriminate against us, the LGBTQ, as a people they discriminate against the straight. Yes, if your answer remains yes, then you, sir, would end up being a self-loathing person as you allow the continuing of discrimination of yourself in the reality / dimension / universe that is the very same planet and the very same United States of America that you, yourself, regardless, go to reside and take office in. Hashtag Donald Trump abdicate the office and let Hillary Clinton run this country for the love of religion and for any shred of self-love you have for yourself or die from yours or someone else's hand. Good day. Though confusing, Chris's point seemed to be that he wants Pemer to consider the perspective of an LGBT-oriented person before making his decision on the bill, aside from the death threat at the end. It is a fair effort by Chris, whose own autism makes it difficult for him to empathize with other people. In any case, said bill was never passed or signed by Pemer. By the time he encountered the idea guys, Chris had shifted his focus from being invested in following LGBTQ groups to being invested in his imaginary world. Without the influence from LGBT groups, Chris seems to have left his hatred for Trump and his interest in politics behind, preferring to occupy himself with his polyamorous marriages and alternate dimensions. Nonetheless, Chris vocalized his support for Andrew Yang in October 2019 during the lead-up to the Democratic Party primaries to select a nominee for president. This was most likely due to Yang's support of universal basic income, which Chris probably hoped would upgrade his monthly tugboat significantly. Conversely, he practically ignored any and all news concerning Trump's impeachment in December 2019 and the months that followed, which demonstrated Chris's comparative lack of interest in politics at this point in time. After all, the impeachment process would have been the earliest point that he could have been removed from office beside January 2021, presuming that he lost the 2020 re-election bid, which he eventually did. However, Chris did become slightly more engaged with politics much closer to the 2020 elections, starting around the time that news that Donald Trump contracted COVID-19 got out. Taking to social media during October 2020, he replied to Ben Saint to dispel his claim that Chris was responsible for Trump's ailment via a curse. Chris also took a moment to proclaim that COVID-19 would not be the cause of Trump's demise, but that his end will come by other means, as his death is foretold as part of Chris's own dimensional merge prophecies. He then vocalized support for Democratic presidential and vice presidential candidates Joe Biden and Kamala Harris a few days later, after their respective debates against Donald Trump and Mike Pence, ensuring that they received the critical Financhu vote in the election. Chris also spread his excitement of someone reportedly hacking into Trump's Twitter account after it was reported to have very minimal security protection. True to Chris's prophecy, Trump recovered from his infection. The actual election arrived on the 3rd of November. Despite Chris's opposition to Trump and the uncertainty of the election, he tweeted that he would vote for Lisa Simpson, likely due to his belief that she would lead the nation after the merge. Provisional results indicated that Chris may be one of the only write-in voters in Ruckersville. Regardless of whether or not Chris really wasted his vote on Lisa Simpson, Biden then won Virginia later that night by nearly 10 points and eventually won enough states for both an electoral college and popular vote victory over Trump. Chris eventually watched a Saturday Night Live segment that he later tweeted about, expressing his delight that Trump would not get a second term. Amid a recent attempt to retreat into his fantasy world, Chris did not comment on the outcome of the runoff Senate races in Georgia, which gave Biden a bare majority in the Senate, the storming of the US Capitol on the following day, or Trump's second impeachment on charges of incitement to insurrect as a result of the storming. However, Chris did comment on Trump's ban from Twitter, which also occurred as a result of the storming. Chris completely lost interest in the former president by early 2021, though he still holds Trump in very low regards, as suggested by recent jail art from 2022. P-Mert is a quickism for billionaire and 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. He initially pronounced it Mert based on his opinion that the P is silent when the name is said backwards. However, in 8 P-Mert 8, he pronounced the P.
Well, Mr. Trump. Or P-Mert.
He said it! He said it!
Starting in the later half of 2016, Chris started to become vocal about his intense dislike of P-Mert on Facebook. In spite of how passionate he feels about P-Mert, Chris's understanding of contemporary politics continues to be exceptionally poor. On the 8th of November 2016, Chris participated in the US presidential election and voted for Hillary Clinton. Following the news that Trump had won the election, Chris reacted by making multiple death threats against him and Vice President Mike Pence, which is actually against the law. This quickism comes from a Facebook comment from the 25th of September, in which Chris says that Trump spelled backwards is P-Mert, which rhymes with hurt, and that Trump would badly P-Mert the US if elected. Once again, Chris performing perfectly reasonable logic for someone who has the right to vote. Reversing Trump's name has twofold meanings. Firstly, names are particularly sacred to Chris. In his eyes, mocking someone's name will severely degrade them. Secondly, Chris has historically assumed that saying something backwards induces subliminal stimuli, which he believes are enormously influential on the psyche and the physical body. Therefore, Chris may believe reversing Trump's name in a negative context might effectively alter his audience's perception of him. Beyond the random access humor, Chris probably thinks his rendition of Trump's name is a serious presidential objection that everyone needs to consider. Chris continued using the backwards name in subsequent Facebook posts and videos. Chris has historically never had any real interest in politics. Combined with his generational indifference towards anything intellectual in favor of nobler pursuits, it's perplexing that Trump's involvement in politics would concern Chris as much as it does. Speculation has suggested a more personal route to Chris's animosity. As Chris's views of politics effectively begins and ends with himself, the true root of his anger lies somewhere in the bramble bush of his confused psyche. For one thing, Chris is highly impressionable. The LGBT blogs and groups he follows on Facebook have a negative opinion of Trump, as they generally do with most right-wing politicians due to their left-wing biases. Going off the minimal amount of information he's absorbed from said blogs, Chris has said that he's afraid of what Trump's presidency could mean for him and his lesbian soul. This is an addition to the general trend among popular culture and major media outlets, which has also been severely critical of Trump. Considering how Chris takes things he sees in media at face value, it makes sense that he would readily and eagerly accept these sentiments without a second thought. Ironically enough, despite Trump's anti-LGBT policies and the potential policies that he claimed that he would never consider implementing, but never did, Chris was hardly affected by any of them due to being a NEET. And too old to experience some of the issues facing younger gay and trans Americans. One of the only areas where Chris would have been negatively affected was the restriction of a few response options on the census, although there's no evidence suggesting that he actually took part in it. Chris has shown that he picks his candidates based on who he can identify with more. On account of his gender confusion and dislike of men, Hillary Clinton was far more attractive to him simply because she was a woman. The evidence for this is overwhelming, especially considering that he once compared her with Sarah Palin. This is also consistent with Chris's fondness of George W. Bush and Barack Obama, both of whom he voted because he liked them personally. Especially important to this discussion is the mentality behind Chris's brand loyalty. Once Chris picks a side on something, he will defend that side no matter what due to a misplaced sense of rigid devotion. This time the side he picked has down and out lost. Chris has been legally able to vote since February 24th, 2000. He's never mentioned voting for losing candidates in a presidential election before. It's possible that his explosive anger is based partially on the fact that his favorite candidate didn't come out on top this time. Chris was especially paranoid in his belief that Trump and Pence hate the LGBTQ community. Chris has said he does not just despise Trump and Pence, but as a lesbian trans woman and a high-functioning autistic person, I fear too what would happen with those two goddamn jerks in the White House. In addition, he said, I fear the loss of my own rights alongside our other LGBTQ community peoples as well. However, he's been vague in explaining why any policies they could implement would affect him. Chris does not face discrimination in the workforce or in society, at least not from being transgender. Though the entire term, Trump and Pence did not criminalize the LGBTQ community and or allowed widespread discrimination of them. Sure, large segments of the Republican Party are anti-LGBTQ, but they generally know that doing such a stunt would be a political suicide. LGBT rights were admittedly a thorny issue going into the 2016 election, likely due to same-sex marriage only having been legalized throughout the country via Supreme Court ruling the previous year. However, the president cannot unilaterally override the Supreme Court decision, and even the more conservative justices appointed by Trump during his term are highly unlikely to strike down the earlier ruling, as the court historically has refrained from making decisions which deprive large groups of individuals of their rights. Due to such decisions related to African Americans and slavery, the early mid-19th century being seen as a major cause of the American Civil War. Although he's released conflicting statements on the matter, Trump expressed some progressive ideas regarding transgender issues. Chris is aware of this but still refuses to give Trump credit, saying he's most offensive to use the LGBTQ communities, regardless of his transgender bathroom choice statement. In any case, the only anti-LGBT thing Trump did as president was barring transgender people from serving in the military, which was reversed almost immediately after he left the office. It's not like the LGBT people would simply poof out or be imprisoned the moment Trump was inaugurated as Chris assumed. Chris also criticized Pence, saying that Pence is just as much anti-LGBTQ and everything else that Trump is, so my feelings are the same with that rat bastard as well as very much. His criticism of Pence, however, is a little more understandable, since he has indeed promoted anti-LGBT policies and is firmly against same-sex marriage, like many other Republicans. In fact, the aforementioned military transgender ban was his idea. Trump was critical of welfare in the past and throughout his campaign. Should he find Congress agreeable, one of his aims could have been to pass legislation limiting welfare's funding and availability. Chris was dimly aware of this and feared that he may end up finding his tugboat reduced or even completely taken away. Throughout Trump's term, Congress did not propose or pass any legislation on that matter. As such, Chris continues to receive his tugboat without any problems. On the 14th of November, he stated, "They would drain money from SSI, making my mother and I closer to broke." In truth, what makes Chris and Borb closer to broke is themselves. Given the rapid decline in their finances, he was hoping Hillary Clinton's policies would increase their tugboat revenue, if not bail the Chandlers out entirely. Chris has adamantly refused to budge on his anti-Trump positions. On the 20th of November, after radio silence following Lizzie the Lazy readers and his Facebook friends criticizing him for his repeated death wishes, he said, "There's nothing nor any amount of time or whatever else that would make it the cold day in the Earth's core to ever make me have even a remote inkling of a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma of any change of feeling or heart of mine about Trump ever." Chris's hatred for Trump is so great that he made 4 videos of himself role-playing acts of violence on him with Transformers, My Little Pony, and Lego toys, with 2 of those occurring before the election, including one where he destroyed a Transformers toy, further showing his lack of financial sense. On November 9th, 2016, Chris began making several enraged death threats against the then president-elect. He continued his tirade in the following days, adding Vice President Mike Pence to his death prayers the next day, in spite of the possibility that they could land him in serious legal trouble. According to United States Code, a threat against the president is punishable by a fine and/or a maximum of 5 years in prison. Chris has gotten himself into legal trouble multiple times in the past, to the point that he has 6 misdemeanors on his record, with 4 of those stemming from assault crimes. He's also having financial trouble. Despite Chris's repeated calls for Trump and Pence to die, they made it unscathed through their 4-year term. Given that Chris's address is public knowledge, the possibility of the Secret Service visiting and interrogating him for the threats and then either agents or Barb forcing him to not divulge anything should not be ruled out and could be the reason why he eventually stopped making threats. Chris has attempted to rationalize his constant calls for Trump and Pence's deaths and to reconcile his violent attitude with him being bothered that he has to resort to death wishing on anyone. After Chris suggested to the readers of Lizzie the Leslie, an LGBTQ Facebook page, to wish death on Trump and Pence, they instead criticized him for such a stupid thing. One person said wishing death on people you don't like doesn't exactly make you look like a better person in comparison. Chris replied by saying that with Trump and Pence in office, it would then be difficult to impeach them and get Hillary in. Chris has shifted on how he wants Trump to die. Upon learning of the election results, he wanted someone to kill Trump with a sniper rifle. The next day he asked God to do it. Days later, he wanted Mike Pence to murder him. He also believed it was possible that Trump will die from old age before Inauguration Day.
Hello people on the internet, it's ChrisChan coming to you live from home once again. And yeah, Trump has been elected. But there's a chance that he will not make it into office. Because of his age, at the very least. Hey, males die before women. Give me a break.
And that Clinton would not, since men die earlier than women. Inexplicably, Chris also wants science to kill Trump. Chris has considered the notion of Trump and Pence going to prison, but has concluded that prison is unlikely for them, how difficult impeachment is, what other option is there? He believes Trump should be jailed for all of his sexual assaults and rape on women. He would prefer for Trump and Pence to simply hand over their democratically elected positions, saying to give the role of president with most civil grace to Hillary Clinton, and since that is most bloody unlikely of Trump ever, I'm still most pained to continue having to pray for Trump's and Pence's death to happen before January 2017 by someone else's hands or illnesses. Chris further demonstrated his lack of political understanding in a post on the 4th of December, in which he said that Trump should advocate the position and take Pence with him and let Hillary be president, as she should very well be. Chris likely has the word advocate confused with abdicate, which is a term he might have heard in British TV shows. It's a term typically used in reference to a monarchy. Due to his stubbornness, Chris has refused to budge from his anti-P-Merc positions, even after Lizzie the Leslie readers and his Facebook friends criticized him for his repeated death threats. On the 20th of November, he stated, "I have given my issues and feelings of Trump some thought. They are justified," followed by saying, "As much as I would like to choose to be rednecked and stubborn enough to plead complete ignorance and utter denial of him and Pence not only on the verge of taking office, there's still too many damn visuals about the bastards that plain further frustrate and upset me." Unfortunately for Chris, he simply forms his opinions via skimming clickbait articles whose authors are inclined to disagree with Trump. Due to his untreated autism, he hasn't attempted to do any research of his own on what Trump and Pence have said and done. Instead, he opts to live on willful ignorance, putting no effort into enriching himself with knowledge and getting frantically emotional about matters he barely understands. It's to the point that he believed death upon Trump and Pence before January 2017 at this time and point was a necessary evil. Barack Obama was the 44th president of the United States of America. He was succeeded by Donald Trump on the 20th of January 2017. He appears briefly in Financhu issue 8 in episode 17, painting the White House black. There was a popular joke where he did so after winning the presidential office. Chris obviously took this joke way too seriously, even believing it as an actual rumor about Obama. In his appearance, Obama is wearing a kufi, which is a traditional West African hat associated with Muslims. This is probably the result of Chris seeing photos of Obama wearing a kufi that have been released. Chris, while initially disliking Obama, felt he and Obama were much a lot alike, in that they were both discriminated against, essentially equating Kick the Autistic with actual racial discrimination. Chris admitted that after watching the A&E documentary on Obama and John McCain, he decided to vote for Obama because he felt he had more in common with him. In other words, Chris had no interest in or understanding any of the campaign issues or the candidates' opinions on them. Chris did a pre-arranged interview in the video Rollin' and Trollin' where he spoke about how he liked Obama and made no mention of painting the White House black. On New Year's Eve 2009, Chris claimed to have snail-mailed Barack Obama asking to make homo ads on the Wikipedia illegal, with involvement from the FBI and jail sentences. Joe Biden is the current president of the United States. He previously served as the vice president under Barack Obama throughout his term from 2009 to 2017 and was later elected president in the 2020 elections, unseating then incumbent President Donald Trump. He became the 46th president of the United States of America on the 20th of January 2021 instead of Lisa Simpson, who Chris voted for and believes will become president of the United States after the dimensional merge occurs, although he's more than happy to be rid of Trump. Chris was once hopeful that Biden would pardon him following his arrest for incest. Joe Biden assumed the presidency of the United States on the 20th of January 2021 at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. Chris later acknowledged Biden's presidency in reality, Dimension 1218, while also reaffirming Simpson's presidency in reality, C197. Since Biden left the White House with the President Barack Obama in 2017, Chris's grasp on reality has weakened to a point where his make-believe city in Northern Virginia has expanded to include entire dimensions, and his belief that these characters actually exist has ballooned into something called the dimensional merge. Chris even believes that Lisa Simpson will succeed Biden as president after the merge. Although Chris welcomed the fact that Donald Trump did not get re-elected, Chris's continued efforts to avoid reality entirely means that unless Biden can bring fictional characters to life, a la Who Framed Roger Rabbit, or at least give Chris everything he wants, Biden was more or less an inoffensive extra in Chris's world. In October 2021, Chris wrote to Kenneth Engelhardt begging him to contact the local Virginia governors of Rogersville and Charlottesville, Virginia, as well as President Biden, and get me, Christine's body, as well as Christine herself, obviously, a full pardon to get me out of this jail and mess, please. Curiously, Chris did not comment on Joe Biden's vice president, Kamala Harris, given that Biden's administration gave a woman of color the second most powerful position in the entire country for the first time in history. This is in spite of his support for Hillary Clinton in 2016, which was mostly conditional support since 1. She was a woman running for the office and he felt that the nation needed a woman's touch rather than backing any specific policy she proposed, and 2. She was not Donald Trump. Chris's silence on Harris' role in the government generally reflects his apathy towards politics since beginning his Messiah complex delusions. And that's the end of the video. If you liked it, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. See ya!